Honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be sharing my time with the member from Vancouver Quadra. Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying that we have the utmost and deepest respect for the public service employees. The work they do is vital to Canada's economic, social and cultural prosperity, and we deeply regret that they are experiencing pay issues and that these issues are affecting them and their families. All of us in government take very seriously our responsibility to ensure employees are paid accurately and on time. From my time as a member of the Government Operations and Estimates Committee, I can speak to issues of employee pay that we inherited on Election Day and have been seized with ever since. To that end, I welcome the opportunity to speak of our government's efforts to stabilize and correct the pay system. We can note that this issue has been around for quite some time, and even in the period prior to 2008, pay issues affected the public service. And we have cases from Lapointe, Murchison, Baldock, Prosper that all point to problems with government pay that need to be corrected and have for a long time. Mr. Speaker, allow me to take each aspect of the motion in turn, beginning with the first clause of the motion that calls on the government to pay all employees correctly, on time, every time, for the work they do. Let there be no doubt our government is committed to doing just that. That is why our government has been giving the matter our full attention and applying the necessary resources to fix the problem. Our priority is to get public servants paid accurately as soon as possible. We are listening to the concerns raised by employees, and we are working as quickly as possible to resolve them. We will continue to work with all stakeholders, including union leadership, to find efficient solutions to the pay challenges for the short and for the long term. Mr. Speaker, since the launch of Phoenix, the government has dedicated significant financial resources to address the problem. The government has foregone $210 million in savings booked prematurely by the previous government, leaving those funds with the 45 departments and agencies served by the Pay Centre to help them assist them with the pay issues within their organizations. Let me explain. As part of the original 2009 implementation plan for Phoenix, the new pay system was supposed to generate savings across government departments. These departments were expected to transfer the savings they generated from Phoenix to the government. Given that employees need more support and departments need more resources to help resolve pay issues, our government has decided to leave this money with those organizations so that the funds can be used to resolve the issues for employees. That is not all, Mr. Speaker. Last spring, our government announced $142 million in investments in capacity and technology. This included hiring more employees to process pay transactions, and most recently, $56 million was allocated to further help stabilize the pay system. Mr. Speaker, these measures are part of our government's commitment to doing everything it takes to ensure employees are paid what they are owed on time, every time. Now let me turn to the second part of the motion, calling on us to exempt those who have been overpaid by Phoenix from having to pay back the gross amount despite actually receiving a substantially lower net amount. Mr. Speaker, I would like to report that the government is implementing measures to help ensure that employees do not experience any permanent impacts because of Phoenix. First, the government is working with unions to ease the repayment burden on employees. Second, we are reimbursing employees whose income is being taxed at a higher tax bracket. Third, we are reimbursing employees whose Canada Child benefits and other income-tested benefits are being reduced. And fourth, we are also offering to refund employees who need to consult experts to sort out their income taxes because of errors in their pay. In short, Mr. Speaker, we are very aware of the potential tax implications and other implications of Phoenix and are taking actions to mitigate any negative effects on employees. We are, in fact, taking the holistic approach advocated by the second part of this motion. I would now like to address the third part of the motion that calls on government to compensate those in the public service who have experienced damages from Phoenix, both financial and otherwise. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada is doing everything possible to ensure that no employee remains out of pocket because of the errors caused by the Phoenix pay system. In July 2016, bargaining agents advised the government of employee concerns about the potential for inconsistent treatment of compensation claims for the financial hardships they experienced due to pay problems within Phoenix. The Government of Canada responded by establishing an out-of-pocket claims process. For example, if an employee used their line of credit to cover regular payments while they were underpaid and have incurred interest charges, they can claim those expenses. The process has been designed to resolve employee claims quickly, and each organization has a Phoenix claims officer who is available to answer questions and guide employees through the process. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to address the final clause of the motion before us today, that the government publicly apologize to all of those who have endured hardship as a result of the government's error. Mr. Speaker, the government has done exactly just that. In November, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement sent a letter of apology to federal public employees. Let me quote now from that letter, and I quote, "This issue is the most important file on my desk, and I apologize to those of you experiencing pay issues that are affecting you and your families. Your stories of hardship caused by the backlog of financial transactions keep me awake at night." And it goes on. "I am working with dedicated officials as well as the Minister's working group to make sure that our government remains open and transparent and that we take concrete action to resolve the pay issues that have very real consequences on your day-to-day lives." Mr. Speaker, as I have explained, the motion before us today calls on the government to take 4 actions that the government has already completed or are underway. As my honourable colleagues have already highlighted, the government is taking extensive action to ensure that this unacceptable situation is cured as quickly as possible, and the government is leaving no stone unturned because we agree that it's completely unacceptable that the proper pay of this country's excellent public service is at stake. I would also note that in respect of what's before us today, that if not for the preamble, the government would be perfectly prepared to support the motion. But as it stands, we cannot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank my colleague for for his analysis of the motion in each of its parts. We've been hearing from members of the third party outrage around the experience of our civil servants, which I know we all share on this side of the House. We've also been hearing allegations of neglect and undermining of the public servants and their collective bargaining agents and the unions. And I would like to ask my colleague what his thoughts are in terms of the kinds of efforts that our government has made to show respect for and within the civil service, including their bargaining agents.
Member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, my colleague from Vancouver Quadra. In addition to the backlog that we found ourselves in, the employment deficit within the data entry capacity of Phoenix that we found ourselves with following the election, there was also a massive backlog in negotiating of contracts with public service employees. In order to implement all those new rules with the old contracts, the backlog of retroactive pay associated with the contract negotiations, and then the new contracts as they entered into force, it was an extremely complicated and difficult task. No one on our side has anything but the utmost good faith in the work that the unions have done in this. We support their efforts to make sure that the system is holistic and that it functions well and that all the rules are implemented. And we place the blame squarely on those who failed to make sure that we had a robust system. If you look at what the Auditor General had already put forward in his comments on what has happened, since the June period of 2016 following, we can see there that there was a real gap in data entry. It points to the fact that they tried to do too much too soon and take all the financial rewards before they'd accrued them. This is a process that really should have been broken up into 2 steps. 1, getting a new functioning electronic pay system that works within the confines of the systems that existed with the government within the departments, and then had that proven correct, then look at a process to possibly centralize it if that had made sense. But they did not, and this is what we're left with.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's easy to pass the buck back, but the reality is that the warnings were there and they decided to proceed. But I think that I want to talk about what we can do about another upcoming labour issue that's currently there, and the fact that the Parliamentary Secretary and others in the Liberal Party have bragged about how many collective agreements that they've actually signed from the previous government. But at the same time, right now, when I have one of the most outstanding one for several years now, for a number of years, that's also involving a court system, is the issue over CBSA workers and the fact that we still do not have an agreement, despite there being a number of different attempts. And so perhaps the member can shed some light on the fact that we have our CBSA men and women on the front lines not having a contract right now, and the government using the courts as opposed to actually using process.
Member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. I can't necessarily speak to the negotiations at the bargaining table because I'm not there. But I will say that these problems related to employees not being under contract or their pay not being appropriately accommodated or the data not being properly entered or the rules not existing in the electronic system, those situations existed before Phoenix. In my riding, I know the member is interested in the CBSA workers in his riding. There are some in my riding as well as Coast Guard workers who didn't have appropriate pay, and that issue predated Phoenix and was only compounded by Phoenix, where without having the rules in place, without having the good data entry, it's garbage in, garbage out in any electronic pay system, and that's what we were left with, garbage.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Edmonton West.
I want to thank my colleague from St. John's East for his mostly factual comment. We served a long time together on Operations Committee and dealt with Phoenix nonstop in a mostly nonpartisan way, and I appreciate that. I want to bring up the issue again. In November, when we had the minister in committee discussing Phoenix, we broached the idea of resources for the constituency offices to help people affected by Phoenix. The minister at that time committed to having an answer for us by December 15th. And Marie LeMay, her deputy minister, stated in that meeting, I understood ministers say that we'd get back to you in 2 weeks as to what the process will be. That was over 2 months ago. We still don't have the process. I understand this gentleman's concern for his constituents as well. I wonder if he can stand up and say he will pursue this issue with the minister so that she fulfills her commitment that she made November 28th to have an answer for MPs by December 15th on how the government is going to allow extra resources so we can help our constituents affected by the Phoenix system.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge the wonderful time we had together working not only on this file, which was quite difficult, but also on Canada Post. And it's a very cordial House of Commons Standing Committee that is the Government Operations and Estimates. I have not sat on it since the break due to some scheduling conflicts that had me moved, so I was not aware until just now that the answer had not been forthcoming to the committee. And I do undertake to reach out to the minister to determine whether or not additional resources will be provided to MP staff in their constituency offices. Obviously, some people have more federal employees affected than others, and it's something that I'm happy to get back to the member with offline.